Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to have some fun making some ribbons using soft body dynamics. Let's learn how. Alright, so this is an example of what we're going to be creating today using some cool ribbon dynamics using soft body dynamics inside of Cinema 4D. This is set up without any keyframes whatsoever, so it's a really cool workflow to maybe help you guys out with some of your MoGraph projects in the future. So let's jump in and find out how I did this. So the first thing we're going to do is just create a little scene here, if you can call it a scene. I'm just going to make some cylinders here and just make them kind of small. And I'm just going to, these are just going to be kind of like rollers that will have the ribbon fall on top of and be pulled across, kind of like a conveyor belt kind of thing. So there's our cylinders. We can apply some happy wood textures on these, something like that. So there we go, we got some happy wood textures, and then I'll just create a simple plane object, one for the floor, because we want this to actually collide into a floor, and then one plane that's going to be the ribbon. Now for the ribbon, what I'm going to do is I want this to be fairly linear in that I don't want the ribbon to kind of go to the left or the right. I kind of just want this to shoot across one plane, which is the Z plane, to just go straight across and not kind of fold and flop on over. So let me just demonstrate what I'm getting after here. So let's set this scene up for dynamics. So right now, no dynamics is applied. All of these objects right here are cylinders in our floor. Let me just rename this floor so we know what the heck that is. All of these are just going to be colliders, meaning that this ribbon is going to be collided into everything else in the scene, but those objects, these cylinders, are not going to have forces act upon it. So gravity won't be applied to it or anything like that. They're just going to be bumps on a log, going to get collided into by this ribbon. So I'm going to right click, go to simulation tags, collider body. Now this is very aptly named, as once you apply this to objects, they are just going to be collided into. And for the ribbon, we're actually going to use soft body dynamics. Now soft body dynamics is very aptly named as well, where it allows the object that you apply the soft body dynamics to, I'm just going to apply a texture real quick, it's just going to kind of it's just going to kind of flop down. And what controls all the soft bodies options are in here. All these springs, you're going to see that because these cylinders and all this good stuff have collider bodies on them, the floor, these cylinders, you're going to see that, hey, our ribbon collided into those objects. So this is this soft body tab of our dynamics body tag right here on this ribbon is where all the happy good stuff, all the nitty gritty, really ooey gooey soft body stuff happens. So I have another tutorial that goes in depth on what all these springs are and all this good stuff. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about the soft bodies. And that phrase just sounded a little bit dirty. But let's go ahead and just cover really quick what we're going to be dealing with. So these are springs, and we have structural, shear, and flexion springs. Structural are the springs that kind of connect the edges. And then we have dampening, which basically dampens the, or damping. It should be dampening though. But it basically dampens the oscillation of those soft body springs on each of these types of springs here. So shear, it prevents the connections between like the angles, like the vertical or the diagonal angles here from kind of folding over one another. So those are the two type of springs we're going to be dealing with today. And you're going to notice that the more springs we have, the stiffer our object is. So if I just put 5 on these and we just have this play, you're going to see that's a little bit, especially with the flexion down, it's going to be more like a wet paper bag kind of thing. It's going to give way. And the other thing that controls a lot of this too, as well, are the segments here. So if I up the segments, especially in the height, and then let this go, you're going to see a lot more detail, a lot more crazy stuff happening. You're going to see our our stuff just fall through the floor and things are dancing around, and this is perfect. Send it off the client, take a vacation. No, this looks like hot garbage. So what we're going to do to fix this, and we want this more ribbon-like, and you can see what I'm talking about as far as the movement back and forth, where we just want, see, it's kind of like sliding off to the side. We don't want that kind of movement, and that movement is basically being done by that flexion. The flexion is point-based and allows our object to go from side to side. And I'm actually going to just get rid of all the width segments altogether, so we just have height segments. So we're just going to get a nice straight ribbon, so we can make this go again. You're going to see that it's also going to fall through the floor. We need to stiffen this up a little bit and give it more springs to define the shape of this ribbon here. So what I'm going to do is kind of crank up the structural and the shear to a bigger number, like 200 and 200, and you're going to see that we have a little bit more detail. We still have a lot of funky stuff going on, and this is due to the fact that if I hit Command D and go into my project settings here, there's this dynamics tag. By default, in the expert tab of the dynamics tag, we have these steps per frame and the maximum solver iterations per step. Now basically this increases the calculations and helps create a more accurate dynamics calculation. So when you're seeing stuff like, hey, this object's just falling through my floor and all this stuff, it's a good bet that you need to up these two options here. So this just means that there's more calculations per frame, more accurate dynamic simulation. So let's just go ahead and let's just crank this up to like 30 and 30 and see what happens. And you're now going to see that, hey, we no longer have our ribbon falling through the floor, and we actually get a little bit more of an accurate simulation. We can definitely see the form of the cylinders a lot better as well, and it's behaving like we would expect this thing to, right? So one thing I want to go over, you can see a lot of stuff moving around, a lot of flailing. That could be helped by upping the damping on both the structural and the shear springs. You can see that just with the structural and the shear, we're not actually moving side to side, which is really great. Let me just bring up the flexion, and you're going to see what's going to happen. You're going to see a lot of folding from side to side, and this is the kind of thing, especially right here, that we don't want. So when we remove the flexion, it's going to stay a little bit straighter and a little bit stiffer, and not going to fall from side to side, because that flexion is what actually enables that kind of movement. So we just want straight across. And actually one of my cylinders is a little bit too far to the right there. Okay, so we have some stretching going on here. As you can tell, is that here's our original subdivision of our plane object, or our ribbon, but it's getting stretched out, right? So let's go ahead, and we need to do a little bit more tweaking here. The first thing I want to do again is go back to the damping and try to get rid of all this oscillation. And we can crank this up to a huge number, like 2000, 2000, and let this simulation go again. And you're going to see that it kind of more gradually falls, and it dampens all that springy movement and kind of tightens things up a bit. Let's go ahead and up the structural here to like 200, and you're going to see that those little stretchings, you know how everything kind of sags, adding more springs to the structural will tighten that up and make everything look more like a ribbon. Now, we can crank this up to a crap ton percentage, which is the official scientific definition of a number that high. And you can see that the oscillations are a bit less. Cool, so now we can actually like start to animate this, and animate it by having these rollers, these cylinders, just move. So let's apply some animation without any keyframes using a time effector. So to have objects be affected by effectors in this effector menu, we actually need to place them in a fracture object that will then allow all that effector information and movement to pass on to its children objects. So I'll just place these cylinders underneath the fracture, and I'll just make this cylinder fracture object, and then I'll go ahead and grab a time effector. Now, a time effector is super useful. I covered the time effector in another tutorial that if you want to check that out, definitely hit that up. But the time effector basically applies animation that is just kind of constant. So you can see we have this little twirling around, and that's all controlled by the value that you put in either rotation or position or whatever. But you can see that this is just applying a constant rotation in that heading rotation. So it's kind of like you're used to After Effects and that time multiply by expression, same kind of thing. Like this just automates animation, constant animation, without requiring any keyframes whatsoever. So these are actually spinning in the wrong direction. So let's have these spin in the pitch, and you can see that now we have these kind of rollers rolling in a direction, and they're actually going backwards. So we'll go like -250. You can see they're all rolling forward. Now you can see that nothing's really happening. There's no traction for these rollers to affect the ribbon here. And we can add some traction by going into our collision tab and upping the friction. Now let's actually go into all of these and just get rid of the bounce. We don't want much bounce at all. We want this to act like almost like a receipt ribbon of paper or something like that. So what we're gonna do is crank up the friction amount to like 90. And you're gonna see that just adding that friction is kind of creating this nice conveyor belt effect. And let's actually crank this up even more. And now you can really see that being passed along. It's almost like a tank tread or something like that. These little wheels are spinning and moving along our ribbon, which is awesome. So one thing you're going to notice is that this looks like crap. If you render it, it's all chunky, right? So the one thing we can do to help that out is go into our cloth, our simulate menu, go to cloth, and go to cloth surface, and place that ribbon underneath that cloth. And you're going to see that's going to try to smooth that out a little bit. And especially if we like up the subdivisions here, you can see that's going to smooth everything out really nicely. And we can even add a little bit of thickness if we want. So we can thicken that little ribbon. But there you go. We can up the subdivision. You can really see that's a really dense mesh now. And when we render, it looks fairly nice and smooth. So we can start, playing around with a lot of stuff here. Let's just bring the subdivisions down just for tutorial purposes, and get this looking nice. So we can. I really encourage you to play around with a lot of stuff in here. Even aerodynamics can maybe help out something like this. If it's double-sided, it kind of helps with how a flat piece of paper reacts to dynamics in the scene. So you can see that adds a little bit more of a difference as it's having like drag and lift forces affect this single-sided or two-sided little plane ribbon here. So you can get some cool little effects like this. We can even, let's maybe go up here. Let's shorten this and maybe angle it up like that and have this fall. You can see that it kind of gracefully falls, and you can see that what happens when I take off the aerodynamics, it just kind of falls flat. But this aerodynamics actually does quite a bit, and it makes it more like a sheet almost. So keep that in mind. Play with the aerodynamics to create some cool clothy ribbon effects like that. And then also going into the springs here and maybe experimenting with maybe a crap ton more shear and structural springs, something like that. So you can see that the more springs you add, the more springs, the more information, the more oscillation we get, the more detail we get on our soft bodies versus like 50 springs. So something like that. So this is kind of cool just to get like a folding ribbon. And again, if the ribbon's not quite going fast enough, we can also really crank up the friction here a lot. And you can see that's going to be pulling along. You can see this ribbon slowly moving here. So let's take this a little bit further. So that's just like acting upon a plane here. Let's go ahead and do something more like this. So you can see this is like the same kind of setup. I have a ribbon made out of a spline with a sweep object that is just a spline with a rectangle, no width. So this is effectively like a flat plane going through here. And I'm not going to bore you with how this was set up, but you can see here's my spline. We all know how to make splines, right? And basically what I did was just kind of set up my cylinders the way I want them to. I have my time effector here. You can actually see that I have some cylinders going one direction and some going the other. And I also have a random effector kind of moving these around ever so slightly. So what's going to happen is we're going to have this cool effect of the cylinders kind of pushing and pulling and stretching this, what it will eventually be, this ribbon. So you can see that I put a number 2 where the spline is. So let me just put spline back in there. And you can see that basically what I did was just try to keep this spline as close as possible to these cylinders without getting too close. Because if you get too close, things are going to go nutty with the dynamics. There's going to be some really weird collisions and stuff like that. Another thing I want to point out, and this is very, very important, how this is set up, how the spline's set up. So it's set up with Bezier. And then we need enough information here. Let me just go to my shading lines. And by default, the spline is set to adaptive intermediate points. And what's going to happen if you just leave it like that, you can see all this uneven subdivisions or subdividing of our sweep object here. And that is going to cause some very funky soft body dynamic ribbons. We want to try to make this as evenly subdivided as possible. So what I've kind of played around with and what I've discovered is the best intermediate point method is subdivided and then bringing the angle and the maximum length both to about 5. So you can see we have this nicely subdivided little ribbon set up here. And that should lessen any kind of issue. So we have our wheels turning, and all we need to do now is, again, apply all those soft body or all those dynamic tags to all of our objects in our scene. So let's just select all of our cylinders here, right-click, go to Simulation, Collider Body, and again, get rid of the bounce. Maybe adjust the size increment here just to give it a little bit of padding. What this size increment does is gives a little bit of space for the dynamics to kind of act as a buffer. So you don't have any geometry intersection or anything like that. So usually like a value of like 0.5 or even like 1, like some small value gives just a big enough buffer so you won't have this ribbon intersecting with the cylinders here. So let's go ahead and just like we did with the other example, crank up the friction to a fairly high amount. And let's see, everything else is good here. And then we'll just go ahead and on the ribbon, on the sweep object ribbon, we'll just go ahead and apply a collider body, or not a collider body. I was testing you. That was wrong. Okay, we're going to go and get a soft body. There we go. And again, we'll use the more accurate shape, so moving mesh. And we can do a size increment here as well, but I don't think we'll really need that. We'll just bring the bounce to 0, no bouncing allowed, and then friction 250 as well. So here again is where we make the bacon right here. It is all in the soft body settings here. Now remember, in our last example, we had no flexion. Get out of here, flexion. And we had very high values, a scientific crap ton of springs and some dampening. So let's just go back and just check to see what those values were. So we can start with those. So we had, what was higher than that? But 200 and 200, and let's give that a go. So we'll just do 200 in the structural, 200 in the shear, and then for the dampening, crap ton, a little too much crap ton. Okay, so now let's see what happens here. You're gonna see that, okay, we got some stuff happening. We have a lot of, so right here, let's stop it right there. You can see that all of our subdivisions that were evenly spaced out kind of falls apart. And the reason for this is we need more structural springs to stiffen all of that up, because we have quite a few subdivisions. We need to up our structural amount. So let's crap ton it up. 6,000. Boom. You get 6,000. Everybody gets 6,000. So let's go ahead and do this again. You're going to see that by upping those spring values, we now have a more consistent, well, a little bit more consistent type of thing going on. And one thing I'm seeing is this bunching up of our ribbon. So let's go ahead, and maybe that friction amount was a little bit too much. So let's go ahead, let's go 150. And actually, just like we did previously, let's go into our dynamics project settings. So again, that's Command D, or just go into this mode, project settings, and go into the dynamics tag, go into the expert, and again, let's up these steps per frame in maximum solver iterations per frame. And we're gonna crank both of those up to 30 and 30. Now let's see what happens. You're gonna see this is gonna slow it down a little bit, but you're not seeing those polygons stretching or anything like that. We're getting a more accurate type of thing going on here. So still kind of very loose, and we would expect this to be very tight around these cylinders. Now there's one really, really cool function inside of soft body dynamics, and that is this rest length right here. So what this means is that the rest length of all of our springs is 100% of what they start out with. If we make this bigger, we're gonna have, wait for it, a lot of stretching, because what's actually happening is it's making the rest length of each of those springs twice its normal size. So you can see all this explosion and expansion because we're basically doubling the size of those springs. Now, conversely, if we bring the rest length to like 25, it's actually going to shrink those springs, and you're going to see it's going to whoop, like suck in. We just gave liposuction to our soft body dynamics here, and you can see that this is actually really awesome. This tread kind of suctioned itself to this shape because we shrunk the initial size of those springs by using this rest length. One other thing I want to cover that's very important is this elastic limit. It's kind of like the rest length, where this elastic limit basically tells what's the limit of these structural springs, like how much times the original size can those springs stretch. And by default, it's set to 1,000%. What I actually want to do is make that 0. I don't want any kind of stretching kind of like this happening here. And this actually would have helped out in our original example as well. If we bring this elastic limit to 0, you'll get way less stretching and it'll be a lot stiffer. You can see that right there. All right, so let's go back to our ribbon version 2. And one thing you're going to notice, let's bring that elastic limit down to 0. One thing you're going to notice is that once it stretches down, we have a very skinny ribbon. And we don't want a very skinny ribbon. We want a fairly large ribbon. So what we want to do with that is, and one thing I think I'm going to do is let's just test with not so much of a crap ton of damping there. So maybe something like that. Okay, so let's go ahead, and again, experimenting will help a lot with this. And I keep seeing right here this big gap, and sometimes that's due to the original spline and maybe some of the Bezier handles. So if you see something like that crop up, maybe adjust some of these handles, the angles, something like that. After experimenting quite a bit with this technique, I've kind of troubleshooted this effect a little bit, and sometimes you just need to give a little bit of love to the handles to try to iron out some of those weird issues. And now you can kind of see, okay, we don't have that big gap here anymore, but we have this big gap right down there with those wider polygons. So maybe we have to adjust something in here as well. So just so you know that if you see those issues pop up where you have those very wide gaps between polygons or the subdivisions, just mess around with the Bezier handles. You can see, looks like we fixed that pretty well. Cool. So that's just a little bit of troubleshooting. So let's go back to the task at hand. One last thing we got to do is we need to stretch out this ribbon a little bit more, so as we shrunk it using the rest length here. So what we're going to do is we'll just overcompensate for the shrinking value, which is just we shrank it by a quarter, right? So 25% of the 100%. So what we'll do is we'll add on a quarter of the size in the Z. So let's actually just, double it and see what happens there. So this is going to shrink down. You can see that we made it a little bit wider. So maybe let's try like 2.75. Let this go, and that looks a lot better. That looks like almost to where our original width was of our ribbon. You can see as this time effect, and the best part about this, no keyframes. You can see that this is moving along like a tank tread or something like that, and it's all due to this friction on these cylinders, the soft body dynamics with the rest length set down to 25 to suction and shrink that ribbon into place. So it's almost like, this would be really, really nice for it makes me think immediately of like a timing belt on a car or something like that, some kind of conveyor belt system. And you don't need to do any kind of complex, all this stuff up here. Where's all this? The connectors and the springs and force and motors and da-da-da-da-da. No, sir. And no, ma'am. We are just using soft body dynamics, a time effector, some MoGraph, and a little bit of love. So one last thing you might be asking is, hey, EJ, what the heck? I can't just render out an animation from this point to that point. How do I get this to just have this dynamic simulation just suction itself from the get-go to this point? Well, I'll tell you. The only thing we have to do to have it actually maintain this shape and then proceed to do the soft body dynamic simulation from this state is by simply going over to the domain dynamics tab and just saying set initial state. And what this will do is allow this current state to be the starting state. And you can see that everything's a little off because I still have that time effector going and stuff like that. But you're going to see that that actually snaps back fairly quickly. And now we don't have that big suctioning that we had previously. And we have a little bit of overlap right off the top, but you can always edit that out once you go ahead and render. All right, so now it's your turn to create some fun soft body dynamic ribbons inside of Cinema 4D. If you make anything based off this tutorial, I'd love to see what you come up with. Leave them in the comments section or tweet them at me, Instagram them at me, Facebook me right in my face with everything that you guys are making after you watch this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. I'll get to them as quickly as I can. And if you have any other questions about anything in this tutorial, maybe you want to see how I made that wood texture, definitely leave those comments in the old comments section down below. And if you like this tutorial, I'd really appreciate if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more from me. I would really appreciate that. So I'll see all of you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, everybody.